you grabbed it without thinking. It's been in your fridge or freezer for years, the same brand, the same red and white package, the same smoked, juicy, seasoned to perfection language on the front. But flip it over, and the ingredient panel tells a very different story than the photo on the box. Sausage is one of the most engineered products in the American grocery aisle. It doesn't have to look like meat, taste like meat, or even be mostly meat to earn the word sausage on the label. Federal regulations leave enormous room for fillers, water, mechanically separated protein, and flavor-masking additives, as long as certain minimums are technically met. Most shoppers never read past the front of the package. That's exactly the gap this investigation is built to close. Today we're breaking down 7 of the most popular sausage brands sold across the United States, the ones sitting in nearly every fridge in the country, and showing you exactly what the ingredient label reveals that the front of the package doesn't. Then we'll show you 5 brands that actually deliver what their packaging promises: real meat, minimal processing, and nothing hiding behind a natural flavor line. By the end, you'll know exactly what to look for the next time you're standing in that aisle, and which of your current go-to brands might be worth reconsidering. This isn't about scaring you away from sausage. It's about closing the gap between what the front label implies and what the ingredient panel actually says. Here's how this investigation works. We're ranking 7 widely available sausage brands from mildly disappointing to genuinely concerning, based on 4 things: ingredient transparency, curing agents and preservative load, filler and extender content, and any documented quality or safety issues on public record. Every claim here is based on published ingredient panels, company-disclosed sourcing information, and publicly available USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service records, not speculation. Then we pivot. 5 brands that get it right: shorter ingredient lists, clearer sourcing, no filler tricks, because the goal isn't just to tell you what to avoid. It's to tell you what to buy instead. Let's start with the brand that's probably in your fridge right now. Avoid brand number 1. Oscar Mayer is one of the most recognized names in the American meat aisle, and for a lot of shoppers, that recognition is exactly why it never gets a second look. The assumption is simple: it's a legacy brand, it's been around for generations, so the quality must have kept pace. The ingredient panel tells a more complicated story. Depending on the specific product line, Oscar Mayer sausage links commonly list sodium nitrite as a curing agent alongside corn syrup solids and dextrose, added sugars doing double duty as flavor enhancers and browning agents rather than anything related to the meat itself. You'll also frequently see natural flavors and flavoring listed without further specification, a common industry practice that legally allows manufacturers to bundle undisclosed additive blends under a single vague term. Here's the problem: none of this is illegal, and none of it is unusual for mass-market processed meat. But it does mean that juicy, flavorful claim on the front of the package is doing a lot of work that has more to do with added sugar and sodium chemistry than with the quality of the meat inside. That's a cost and shelf life decision, not a quality one. Verdict: not the worst offender on this list, but a clear example of how legacy brand trust can outpace what's actually changed, or hasn't changed, in the formula. If this is your default pick out of habit, it's worth a second look. Avoid brand number 2. Ballpark built its brand identity around the American cookout, but its sausage lineup leans harder into processing than its grilling culture image suggests. What shoppers assume: because Ballpark is positioned as a classic backyard barbecue brand, there's an expectation of straightforward, simple ingredients: meat, seasoning, casing, done. What the label shows. Several Ballpark sausage products include mechanically separated chicken or turkey as a primary or secondary protein source in select lines, along with modified food starch and soy protein concentrate functioning as binders and extenders. These ingredients aren't dangerous, but they are fillers, added specifically to increase volume and improve texture at a lower cost than using whole muscle meat throughout. Here's what that means in practice. A portion of what you're paying for by weight isn't whole-cut meat. It's reconstituted protein and starch doing the job that meat would otherwise do, at a fraction of the cost. The front label rarely draws attention to this distinction. Made with chicken and pork doesn't tell you how much of the product is mechanically separated versus whole muscle. Verdict: the gap between the cookout imagery and the actual ingredient composition is wider than most shoppers realize. It's not a scandal. It's a cost decision dressed up as tradition. Avoid brand number 3. Eckrich, owned by Smithfield Foods, itself a subsidiary of the Hong Kong-listed WH Group, presents itself as a straightforward, family-style American meat brand. The sourcing story behind that image is considerably less transparent than the packaging suggests. What shoppers assume: an established American brand name means an established, traceable American supply chain. What the evidence shows: Eckrich corporate ownership structure means sourcing and processing decisions sit several layers removed from the brand identity on the package. Several of Eckrich sausage products include mechanically separated chicken and a mix of starches and flavor additives similar to other value-tier brands in this list. Unlike some competitors, Eckrich provides limited public detail about farm-level sourcing or supply chain traceability on its own packaging or website. Here's the problem. When a brand doesn't volunteer sourcing information, that's not proof of a problem, but it does mean shoppers are being asked to trust the name on the label without the transparency that increasingly defines clean brands in this category. That matters because sourcing opacity is often where quality shortcuts hide most easily. Verdict: not flagged for any specific safety incident, but notably behind the curve on the sourcing transparency that shoppers should now expect as standard, not a premium feature. Avoid brand number 4. Jimmy Dean, owned by Tyson Foods, dominates the breakfast sausage category. Link, patty, and roll formats sit in freezers and fridges across the country under the promise of hearty, farmhouse-style flavor. What shoppers assume: farmhouse branding implies simple, minimally processed ingredients consistent with the imagery on the package. What the ingredient panel shows: several Jimmy Dean sausage products list BHA and BHT, synthetic preservatives used to extend shelf life, alongside monosodium glutamate, MSG, as a flavor enhancer. Both are legally approved for use in the United States, but both are also increasingly flagged by shoppers actively trying to reduce synthetic additive intake, and neither appears anywhere in the farmhouse imagery used to market the product. Here's what that means: the disconnect isn't about legality, it's about the story the packaging tells versus the chemistry doing the actual work of keeping the product shelf-stable and flavorful. A shopper reaching for this brand because of its rustic branding has no reason to expect synthetic preservatives and flavor enhancers unless they turn the package over and read closely. Verdict: a stronger case than the first 3 brands on this list. The branding to ingredient gap here is more pronounced, and it sets up exactly the kind of shortcut we're about to see taken even further. Avoid brand number 5. Johnsonville has built its entire brand identity around quality and craftsmanship. Made the Johnsonville way is baked into its marketing at every level. For the most part, its ingredient panels are cleaner than several brands already covered on this list. But quality control is about more than ingredients, and that's where Johnsonville runs into trouble. What shoppers assume: a brand this focused on craftsmanship messaging has airtight production standards to match. What the evidence shows: in 2025, Johnsonville issued a recall of roughly 22,672 pounds of cheddar bratwurst after customer complaints of hard plastic contamination found in the product. The recall was classified by USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service and distributed across 10 states before it was caught. Here's the problem: a strong ingredient list doesn't protect you from a manufacturing floor issue. This isn't a formula problem. It's a facility and quality control problem, and it's exactly the kind of thing that doesn't show up anywhere on the package until it's already in your fridge. Verdict: cleaner ingredients than most of this list, but the 2025 contamination recall is a documented reminder that premium branding doesn't guarantee a contamination-free production line. Avoid brand number 6. Hillshire Farm, another Tyson-owned brand, markets itself on made with pork simplicity and smokehouse tradition. Its track record on the manufacturing side tells a more complicated story than the branding suggests. What shoppers assume, a name built around old-fashioned smokehouse imagery implies careful, small batch-style production standards. What the evidence shows, in September 2025, Hillshire Brands Company recalled approximately 58 million pounds of corn dog and sausage on a stick products manufactured at a Texas facility, after pieces of wood were discovered embedded in the batter. It's one of the largest meat recalls in recent USDA history, and it points to a production line failure at industrial scale rather than an isolated incident. Here's what that means. At the volume Hillshire produces, quality control isn't a boutique operation, it's an industrial process, and industrial processes fail at industrial scale when something goes wrong. A recall this size doesn't happen because of one bad batch. It happens because a contamination issue went undetected across months of production. Verdict: the largest documented failure on this list by volume, and a clear example of how scale can work against quality control instead of guaranteeing it. Avoid brand number 7. And then there's the one sitting quietly on the bottom shelf, undercutting every name brand option on price, the store brand value tier sausage, the great value and equivalent private label lines carried by major retailers. What shoppers assume, it's the same meat, just without the marketing budget, so the savings are essentially free. What the evidence shows, value tier private label sausage typically combines nearly everything flagged individually in the brands above. Mechanically separated meat as a primary protein source, higher ratios of modified starches and soy protein concentrate relative to whole muscle meat, synthetic preservatives, and minimal to no public sourcing disclosure. Because these products are manufactured under contract by different co-packers depending on region and season, ingredient consistency and sourcing traceability are often the weakest of any tier in the category. Here's the problem: this isn't one shortcut. It's nearly every shortcut on this list, stacked into a single product, sold at the lowest price point specifically because those shortcuts are cheaper to produce. The savings aren't free. They're funded by exactly the substitutions we've spent this entire video breaking down. Verdict: the strongest offender on this list, not because of one dramatic failure, but because it combines nearly every issue covered so far into a single product with the least transparency of the group. So that's the avoid list, 7 brands where the front of the package and the ingredient panel tell two different stories. But this investigation isn't about steering you away from sausage altogether. It's about showing you what it looks like when a brand actually backs up its claims. These 5 get it right. Better option number 1. Welshire Farms built its entire product line around a simple standard: no nitrates or nitrites added, no MSG, no gluten, and no artificial anything. Where the avoid list brands buried additive blends behind vague natural flavor language, Welshire's ingredient panels typically run 5 to 8 ingredients: meat, water, salt, a few recognizable spices, and a natural preservative like celery powder. What stands out? Consistency. Across its sausage lineup, Welshire maintains the same short ingredient list standard rather than varying quality by product line the way several avoid list brands do. Worth noting, Welshire sits at a higher price point than mainstream brands, and availability can be more limited outside larger grocery chains, a realistic trade-off for the ingredient transparency it offers. Better option number 2. Peterson's Natural Farms has built its reputation on traceable sourcing. Pasture-raised, no antibiotics ever, and sausage formulations that skip the starch and soy fillers found across the avoid list entirely. What stands out? Sourcing transparency goes further than most competitors in this category. Peterson's publishes clear standards around how its animals are raised, not just what goes into the final product, closing the exact sourcing opacity gap flagged with brands like Eckrich earlier in this video. Worth noting. As a smaller producer, Peterson's is less widely distributed than national brands, so availability varies by region. Better option number 3. Applegate has spent over 3 decades positioning itself around no antibiotics ever and humanely raised meat, and its sausage lineup reflects that consistently across nearly every product in its catalog, not just a premium subline. What stands out? Scale without the shortcuts. Applegate is now widely available in most major grocery chains. Meaning shoppers don't have to sacrifice convenience to get a cleaner ingredient list, which sets it apart from smaller boutique brands on this list. Worth noting, Applegate's broader distribution comes with a broader product range in terms of quality tiers, so it's still worth checking individual product labels rather than assuming every item in the lineup meets the same standard. Better option number 4. Teton Waters Ranch built its brand around 100% grass-fed, grass-finished beef sausage, a sourcing claim that goes a step further than no antibiotics by addressing what the animals were actually fed throughout their lives, not just what wasn't added afterward. What stands out, grass-fed and grass-finished claims are independently significant, since many grass-fed labels only guarantee grass-feeding for part of an animal's life before finishing on grain. Teton Waters' finishing claim closes that loophole directly. Worth noting, like several cleaner options on this list, expect a noticeably higher price point than mainstream grocery brands, a direct trade-off for the sourcing standard. Better option number 5. U.S. Wellness Meats sits at the top of this list for a reason: full farm-to-package traceability, grass-fed and pasture-raised sourcing, and sausage formulations with ingredient lists as short as meat, water, salt, and spices, nothing else. What stands out? This is the most transparent sourcing model of any brand covered in this investigation. U.S. Wellness Meats operates its own supply chain rather than relying on third-party co-packers, which is precisely the traceability gap that made several avoid list brands difficult to verify. Worth noting, it's a direct-to-consumer, online order model rather than something you'll find on a typical grocery shelf. The biggest realistic trade-off here is convenience, not quality. Practical shopper test. Next time you're standing in front of the sausage case, you don't need to memorize 7 brand names. You need 3 seconds and 1 habit: flip the package over before it goes in your cart. First, check the ingredient count. If the list runs past 8 or 9 ingredients, or if you spot the phrase "natural flavors" without further explanation, that's your first flag. It usually means something's being smoothed over rather than disclosed. Second, look for the words "mechanically separated" anywhere in the meat listing. If it's there, a meaningful portion of what you're buying isn't whole-cut meat, no matter what the front of the package shows. Third, check where meat sits in the ingredient order relative to water, starches, and protein concentrates. Ingredients are listed by weight. If starch or soy protein concentrate shows up in the first 3 or 4 ingredients, that's not seasoning. That's filler doing the job meat used to do. None of this takes more than 10 seconds once it's a habit. And that 10 seconds is the entire difference between guessing based on packaging and actually knowing what you're feeding your family. Here's what this investigation really comes down to: sausage doesn't have to be mostly meat to be legally called sausage, and the front of the package is designed to make you stop reading before you get to the part that matters. 7 of the country's most familiar brands lean on legacy trust, cookout imagery, or rock-bottom pricing to distract from fillers, synthetic additives, or documented production failures. 5 brands prove it doesn't have to be that way. Shorter ingredient lists, real sourcing transparency, and a manufacturing standard that holds up under scrutiny. You don't have to overhaul your freezer overnight. Start with the next package you pick up. Flip it over. Run the 3-second check. That's the whole habit. Check your fridge tonight. If one of the 7 is sitting in there, it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It means you were never shown the label was worth reading in the first place. Now you know better. If this changed how you'll shop next time, share it with one person who still buys this on autopilot. That's how this actually helps someone.